That was 6 years ago, before the cancer diagnosis that changed everything. Dad married Nova just 8 months after meeting her. I remember Abigail and I exchanging worried looks at their wedding, but we kept our mouths shut because Dad seemed happier than he'd been since Mom passed. She makes me feel alive again, he'd said, and that was enough for us. Nova played the part well at first, bringing us coffee during hospital visits, organizing family dinners, even planning a weekend trip to the lake house to recreate the old times. Looking back, I should have noticed how she slowly worked her way into every aspect of Dad's life. It started small, suggesting he change his medical proxy from me to her. I'm here every day anyway, it just makes sense. Then convincing him to let her handle the family finances. You need to focus on getting better, darling. Dad was too tired from the treatments to notice how she began isolating him, scheduling his appointments when Abigail and I were at work, changing his phone settings so our messages would sometimes mysteriously disappear. But Dad wasn't as oblivious as she thought. 3 months ago, he asked me to drive him to his treatment instead of Nova. In the car, he seemed different, more alert, almost nervous. "Zane," he said, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "I need you to know something. Everything I've done, every decision I've made in the past year, it's all been for you and Abigail. Promise me you'll remember that." I tried asking what he meant, but he just shook his head and changed the subject to my work. That was the last real conversation we had before things went downhill. Nova started claiming Dad was too tired for visitors, even though Stella, our housekeeper of 20 years, would secretly text me saying he was asking for us. Then last week, everything exploded. I came home to find Nova going through Dad's study, rifling through his papers like a woman possessed. When she saw me, her whole demeanor changed like a switch being flipped. "Your father's very upset with you," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "He doesn't want to see you anymore." I knew she was lying. I'd received a strange voicemail from Dad just that morning. "Son, whatever happens in the next few days, know that I love you. Bo has everything you need." Before I could respond, Nova had somehow convinced our service provider that I was harassing them and had my number blocked from Dad's phone. That's when I lost it. I demanded to see Dad, told her I knew she was lying. She transformed in an instant. Gone was the caring stepmother act. "You ungrateful little shit," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm. "I've done everything to make your father comfortable, and this is how you thank me. By accusing me of lying, get out." "Get out?" She started throwing my things down the stairs, screaming about how I was just like my mother, how I never gave her a chance, how Dad was disappointed in me. Stella tried to intervene, but Nova threatened to fire her on the spot. I'll never forget the look of helpless anger on Stella's face as she watched me pack my car. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Zane, it's Dad. Nova thinks she's won, but she has no idea what's coming. I've taken care of everything. Stay strong, son." When I tried calling back, the number was disconnected. That was 3 days ago. I've been staying at Abigail's place trying to make sense of everything. Dad's words keep echoing in my head. Bo has everything you need. Bo, his lawyer and oldest friend, who I haven't been able to reach since this all happened. This morning, I got a call from the hospital. Dad's condition has worsened significantly. Nova's trying to bar us from visiting, but she doesn't know that I still have medical power of attorney, the one thing she couldn't get Dad to change. I'm heading there now, and something tells me this is just the beginning of what's about to unfold. I never wanted any of this. All I wanted was to spend time with my father in what could be his final days. But Nova chose to make this a war, and from Dad's message, it seems like he's left me with the weapons to fight it. I just hope I'm strong enough to see this through, whatever this turns out to be. Update 1 first, thank you all for the supportive messages. A lot has happened since my last post, and I'm still trying to process everything. That night at the hospital changed everything. I arrived to find Nova already there, perched by Dad's bed like some kind of guardian vulture. The moment she saw me, she started to make a scene, but I calmly showed the nurse my medical proxy paperwork. The look on Nova's face when she realized she couldn't stop me from being there, I'll never forget it. Dad was barely conscious, but when I held his hand, he squeezed it weakly. Nova stormed out to make some calls, and that's when Stella, who had followed me to the hospital, quickly closed the door and pulled out her phone. "Your father asked me to record something," she whispered, showing me a video from 2 weeks ago. In the video, Dad was sitting in his study, looking tired but clear-headed. He spoke directly to the camera. "Zane, if you're watching this, things have probably gotten worse. Nova thinks she's destroyed all evidence of my meetings with Bo, but she doesn't know about the safe behind your mother's old painting. The combination is your mother's birthday, everything you need is there, and son, I'm sorry for putting you through this." I looked up at Stella, who had tears in her eyes. "He made me promise to wait until the right moment," she explained. Nova's been going through his study every night searching for something. Now I know what. Before we could talk more, Nova returned with a hospital administrator demanding I be removed. In the commotion that followed, Stella slipped away. I stayed by Dad's side all night, watching his breathing grow more labored while Nova made endless phone calls in the hallway. He passed away early the next morning. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and barely contained hostility. Nova took charge of everything, barely consulting Abigail or me. She even tried to schedule the service when my sister was supposed to be working, but Abigail managed to swap shifts with a coworker. The morning of the funeral, I went to the house early, using my key before Nova could change the locks. The painting my mother had loved, a simple landscape of our lake house, was still hanging in Dad's study. Behind it, just as he'd said, was the safe. My hands were shaking as I entered Mom's birthday, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't work. But then I heard the click. Inside was a thick manila envelope with 4 ZANE, open only with BO present written in Dad's handwriting. There was also a smaller envelope labeled, read this first, that contained a single note. Son, Nova will try to have the will read immediately after the funeral. Letter, trust BO. Everything is ready. I barely had time to process this before I heard Nova's car in the driveway. I quickly replaced the painting and slipped out through the back door, nearly running into Stella, who was arriving early to help with funeral preparations. She pretended not to see the envelope I was poorly hiding under my jacket. The funeral was exactly as Nova wanted it, showy and expensive, more about impressing her friends than honoring Dad. She even gave a speech about being his soulmate and how they had so many plans for the future. Abigail squeezed my hand so hard during that part that it actually hurt. Just as Dad predicted, Nova had arranged for the will reading to happen immediately afterward. She gathered everyone in Dad's study, me, Abigail, Stella, who Nova couldn't exclude since she was specifically named in the will, and a few other family friends. Bo arrived last, carrying his briefcase and looking unusually serious. Nova was practically gloating as Bo began reading. The will itself was surprisingly simple. Almost everything was left to Nova, with small inheritances for Abigail and me. I watched Nova's face as she grew more and more pleased with each bequest, but then something strange happened. After finishing the will, Bo cleared his throat and said, "There's one more matter to discuss, but it needs to be handled privately with Zane." Nova immediately protested, but Bo was firm. "This is a separate legal matter unrelated to the will." Nova's face went from triumphant to uncertain in an instant. "Whatever it is, I should be involved." As Micah's widow, "This matter predates your marriage to Micah," Bo interrupted, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "Zane, could you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9? Bring the envelope." I hadn't told anyone about the envelope. Nova's eyes darted between us, her expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. As everyone was leaving, I heard her on the phone with someone, her voice tense. "I don't care what it costs, I need to know what else Micah did." "He couldn't have, no, that's impossible. I checked everything. Abigail is letting me crash at her place again tonight." In a few hours, I'll be sitting in Bo's office, finally learning what Dad spent his last months planning. The envelope feels heavy in my bag, like it's carrying the weight of all Dad's final hopes and intentions. Whatever is in that envelope, one thing is clear. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. And somehow I think Nova is about to learn that she didn't know my father nearly as well as she thought she did. Update 2. I've been staring at my screen for hours trying to put this into words. The meeting with Bo changed everything. I arrived at his office at 9 a.m. running on caffeine and nerves. His secretary waved me in immediately, a rare occurrence. Inside, Bo sat surrounded by stacks of documents. The moment I walked in, he locked the door. "Before we start," he said, "have you ever noticed inconsistencies in Nova's background?" I hesitated, then remembered. Last Christmas, she didn't recognize the name of her supposed high school in Seattle when Dad mentioned it. Bo nodded. "Your father noticed things too. That's why he hired a private investigator last year." Then he dropped the bombshell. "Nova Williams, not her real name. It's her 4th alias in a decade. She's done this before 3 times. Marrying wealthy, terminally ill men, isolating them, and somehow always ending up with their inheritance. Dad figured it out 3 months after his diagnosis. But why didn't he just divorce her? Because he had a plan." Bo handed me an envelope containing the mansion's deed, quietly transferred to me just 2 weeks after Dad's diagnosis. It wouldn't be officially recorded until after his death. Nova thought she had control, but legally, she had nothing. And there was more. Dad had documented everything: Nova's manipulations, her suspicious phone calls, even attempts to alter his medications. Stella had helped record conversations, Abigail unknowingly documented medical inconsistencies, and Dad made sure I had medical power of attorney. Then Bo pulled up a video, Nova 2 weeks ago arguing in a parking garage. I need access before that meddling brat interferes. She wasn't alone, the man with her, linked to all three of her previous marriages. Just as the weight of it all sank in, Bo's secretary buzzed in. Sir, Mrs. Williams is here. She's demanding to see you. Bo grinned, perfect timings. Nova stormed in, clutching legal papers, and froze when she saw me. What's he doing here? Funny you should ask, Bo said. We were just discussing property ownership. She paled. She cycled through her usual tricks, crying, threatening, playing the grieving widow. But when none of it worked, her mask slipped. You think you've won? I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone you manipulated your sick father. You'll what? I interrupted, sliding a photo across the desk. Her and Michael Preston, her accomplice. Or should we talk about what happened to your last 3 husbands? She froze. How did you? Dad knew everything, Nova. He just made sure he had the proof before he acted. She bolted. I watched through the window as she made a frantic phone call before speeding away. Bo spent the next hour outlining what happens next. The mansion's deed will be officially recorded tomorrow. We have enough evidence to involve the authorities, but first, we evict her. I just got home from signing the paperwork. Abigail is helping draft the eviction notice. Nova has 30 days to vacate, but we both know she won't last that long. And then there's the envelope Dad left me, labeled "Read when it's done." I'm holding it now, but something tells me I should wait until Nova is officially gone. Tomorrow morning, I serve her the eviction notice. Bo will be there. Stella asked to come too, said she wants to see Nova's face when she realizes the house staff knew all along. Dad's final gift wasn't just the mansion. It was the chance to expose Nova for who she really is, to stop her from hurting anyone else. I just wish he were here to see justice finally being served. Final updates. It's over. The last 48 hours felt like a fever dream, but Abigail keeps reminding me it really happened. Yesterday morning, I walked into the mansion with Bo, eviction notice in hand, only to find Nova hosting a brunch, the perfect setting for what came next. In front of her guests, I played the garage footage, the one where she discussed speeding up Dad's death for the inheritance. The silence was deafening. Nova panicked, lunged for my phone, and in the chaos, I handed her the eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate my property, but with this evidence, you might want to leave sooner. That's when she snapped. You think you've won? Your father was weak. I just made sure his money didn't go to waste on ungrateful brats like you. Her confession stunned the room. Someone called the cops. She ran upstairs, frantically shoving cash and jewels into a bag only to accidentally open a hidden safe. Inside, documents and flash drives exposing her past marriages and crimes. She had kept evidence against her own accomplices. The police arrived, arrested her, and as she was led out, she spat one last jab at me. Your father begged me to stay. He knew you weren't strong enough to handle things. But then Stella stepped forward. Actually, I have his real last words right here. She played a video of Dad in his hospital bed. Nova, I gave you every chance to be better. You chose greed. Zane, Abigail, I love you both. The house is yours now. Make it a home again. Nova fell silent. The cops uncovered her involvement in multiple suspicious deaths. Turns out, Dad had been gathering evidence not just to protect us, but to stop her from hurting anyone else. After the dust settled, I opened Dad's final letter. Son, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't. You exposed Nova's true nature, but that's not why I'm proud of you. The attached USB held late-night recordings of Nova plotting with an accomplice, along with detailed financial records of her scams. Bo forwarded everything to the authorities. She's not making bail. Today, Abigail and I started reclaiming the house. We found Mom's old recipes that Nova had hidden away. Abigail's cooking a family dinner tomorrow. We even brought back Dad's tacky old chair, the one Nova shoved into storage. As I sat down, I found a small note tucked into the cushion, in Dad's handwriting. Some battles are worth fighting quietly. Love, Dad. The police are building a case against Nova's entire operation. They want me to testify, but more importantly, she's lost the one thing she truly cared about, her status. Abigail's moving in next week. We're converting part of the mansion into affordable housing for families dealing with long-term medical care. Dad would have liked that. Justice doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it's in the quiet planning of a dying man who loved his family enough to protect them one last time. And sometimes, it's in the simple satisfaction of sitting in his favorite chair, knowing the house is finally a home again.